Robert had been driving the same road to work for 15 long years. Every morning at 7:30, he would pass the same houses, the same shops, and the same old gas station where Mr. Peterson always waved from behind the counter. It was Tuesday, October 15th, and the morning fog was thicker than usual. The kind of fog that makes you slow down and pay attention to things you normally miss. That's when he saw her. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. There was a small cemetery behind a row of tall oak trees that he had never noticed before. How was that possible? He had driven this route thousands of times, but there it was, with old iron gates and weathered headstones scattered across a small hill. What made him pull over wasn't the cemetery itself. It was the woman kneeling in front of 3 small graves. Even from his car, Robert could see her, shoulders shaking. Her crying was so deep and painful that it seemed to cut right through the morning silence. Robert sat in his truck for a moment, unsure what to do. He wasn't the type of person who usually got involved in other people's business. At 52 years old, he had learned to keep to himself. But something about this scene pulled at his heart in a way he couldn't ignore. He turned off his engine and stepped out into the cool morning air. His work boots crunched softly on the gravel as he walked toward the cemetery gates. The woman didn't seem to notice him approaching. She was completely lost in her grief, holding something tightly against her chest. As he got closer, Robert could see that she was young, probably in her early 30s. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore a simple, blue sweater that had seen better days. In her hands, she clutched an old photograph so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. The 3 headstones in front of her were small and new. Robert could read the names carved into the gray stone: Lucy Chen, age 7, Michael Chen, age 5, baby Grace Chen, only 8 months old. All 3 graves had the same dates. All 3 had died on the same terrible day just 6 months ago. Robert's heart sank as he realized what he was looking at. This woman had lost 3 children all at once. He couldn't even imagine such pain. The woman suddenly looked up, startled by his presence. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, and there were dark circles underneath that told him she hadn't been sleeping well. When she saw him standing there, she quickly wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I'm sorry," she said in a voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know anyone else came here this early." Robert took off his baseball cap and held it in his hands. "No need to apologize, miss. I was just driving by and—" He paused, searching for the right words. "I saw you here and wanted to make sure you were okay." The woman let out a bitter laugh that had no joy in it. "Okay?" She looked back down at the graves. "I don't think I'll ever be okay again." Robert didn't know what to say to that. What could anyone say to a mother who had lost everything? He noticed that she was shivering, even though it wasn't that cold outside. Her sweater was thin, and he could see that her jeans had holes in the knees. "These are my babies," she said suddenly, her voice breaking. "Lucy loved to draw pictures of flowers. Michael collected rocks from everywhere we went. And Grace," she pressed the photograph closer to her chest. "Grace was just starting to walk. She would have been walking by now." Robert felt tears forming in his own eyes. He had lost his wife Claire 3 years ago to cancer, and that had nearly broken him. But losing children? He couldn't even begin to understand that kind of pain. "I come here every morning," the woman continued, "and every evening. Sometimes I bring them flowers from the grocery store. Sometimes I just sit here and tell them about my day, even though there's not much to tell anymore." She looked up at Robert again, and he could see something in her eyes that worried him. It was the look of someone who had given up hope completely. "I'm sorry," she said again. "You probably have to get to work. I don't know why I'm telling you all this. You don't even know me." "My name is Robert," he said gently. "Robert Walsh. And you don't need to apologize for anything." "I'm Amy," she replied. "Amy Chen." Robert noticed that she hadn't stood up from where she was kneeling. He also noticed that her car, an old blue sedan, was parked at the far end of the cemetery. The back seat was packed full of clothes and boxes. There were blankets hanging in the windows. "Amy," he said carefully, "do you have somewhere to stay?" Somewhere warm to go when you leave here? Amy's face turned red and she looked away. For a long moment she didn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet he had to lean closer to hear her. "The car is fine," she said. "It's warm enough." Robert's heart broke a little more. This woman was living in her car. She was grieving the loss of her 3 children and had nowhere to go. "How long have you been staying in your car?" he asked. Amy shrugged. "A couple of weeks, maybe 3. I lost track." Robert looked around the empty cemetery. The morning fog was starting to lift and he could see his breath in the cool air. The nights had been getting colder lately. Soon it would be too cold for anyone to sleep in a car safely. "Amy," he said, "I know we just met, and I know you don't know me from anyone, but I have a guest room in my house that nobody is using. It's warm, and it's clean, and you're welcome to stay there for as long as you need." Amy looked up at him with surprise. "I can't do that. I don't even know you." "I understand," Robert said, "and I'm not trying to pressure you. But nobody should have to grieve alone, especially not in a cold car." He reached into his wallet and pulled out one of his business cards. "I'm a carpenter. I build houses and fix things. I'm not some crazy person, I promise. Here's my card with my phone number. Think about it, okay?" Amy took the card but didn't look at it. "Why would you want to help me? You don't know anything about me." Robert was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to answer that question. 3 years ago, I lost my wife to cancer. During that time, a lot of people helped me when I couldn't help myself. Neighbors brought me food. Friends made sure I didn't spend every night alone. The pastor at our church helped me plan the funeral. I learned that sometimes people help because they know what it's like to hurt that badly. Amy wiped her eyes again. "I'm sorry about your wife." "Thank you," Robert said. "Her name was Claire. She would have liked you." Amy looked down at the business card in her hands. Robert Walsh, it read. Custom carpentry and home repair. Below that was his phone number and address. "I used to be a nurse," Amy said suddenly. "Before all this happened, I worked at the children's hospital downtown. I loved my job. I thought I was helping people." She laughed that bitter laugh again. "Turns out I couldn't even help my own children when they needed me most." Robert could hear the guilt in her voice. "What happened to them, Amy, if you don't mind me asking?" Amy was quiet for so long that Robert thought she wasn't going to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat and empty. "House fire," she said. "I was working a late shift at the hospital. The babysitter fell asleep. An electrical problem in the kitchen. The fire department said it happened very fast. They said the kids probably never even woke up." She pressed the photograph against her chest again. "I got home just as the fire trucks were leaving. Everything was gone. Everything." Robert felt his throat tighten. He couldn't imagine coming home to find everything you loved destroyed. "After that, everything just fell apart," Amy continued. "I couldn't work anymore, couldn't focus, couldn't sleep. The medical bills from the ambulance and the hospital visits were huge. The insurance company took forever to pay anything. I used up all my savings just trying to stay afloat. Eventually, I lost the apartment too." "And you've been coming here ever since," Robert said. "It's the only place I feel close to them," Amy admitted. "The only place that makes sense anymore." Robert understood that feeling. After Claire died, he had spent months sitting by her grave, talking to her headstone like she was still there. It was the only place where the world felt right again. "Amy," he said, "my offer is serious. I have a whole house that's too big for just me. The guest room has its own bathroom, and there's a kitchen where you can make whatever you want to eat. No strings attached. Just a warm, safe place to stay while you figure out what comes next." Amy looked at him with those tired, sad eyes. "Why? Would you do that for a stranger?" Robert thought about that question. The truth was, he wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe it was because he recognized the look of someone who was drowning in grief. Maybe it was because Claire had always told him to help people when he could. Or maybe it was because he had been lonely in that big house for 3 years, and seeing someone else in pain reminded him that he wasn't the only person in the world who was hurting. I guess because everyone deserves to have a place where they feel safe, he said finally. And because I think maybe we could help each other. Amy was quiet for another long moment. She looked down at her children's graves, then back at Robert's kind face. I don't have any money to pay you rent, she said. I'm not asking for rent, Robert replied. I'm asking if you want a warm place to sleep tonight instead of your car. Amy stood up slowly, her legs stiff from kneeling on the cold ground for so long. She walked over to each of her children's graves and placed a small kiss on the top of each headstone. Robert's house was nothing like what Amy had expected. As she pulled into the driveway behind his red pickup truck, she found herself looking at a cozy 2-story home with a wraparound porch and flower boxes under every window. The yard was neat and well cared for, with a large oak tree in the front that still held onto its orange and red autumn leaves. The house looked like the kind of place where happy families lived. The kind of place where children would run around in the backyard and parents would sit on the front porch in the evenings. It made Amy's heart ache with longing for everything she had lost. Robert got out of his truck and walked over to her car. This is it, he said with a small smile. Home sweet home. Amy stepped out of her car and looked around. The neighborhood was quiet and peaceful, with other similar houses lined up along the tree-lined street. She could hear birds singing somewhere nearby, and the smell of someone's fireplace drifted through the air. It's beautiful, she said honestly. Claire picked it out, Robert said, his voice soft with memory. She said it was the kind of house where we could grow old together. She was right about a lot of things. Amy followed Robert up the front steps and onto the porch. She noticed that there were 2 rocking chairs positioned side by side and a small table between them with a coffee mug that looked like it had been sitting there for a while. I still sit out here sometimes in the evenings, Robert said, noticing where she was looking. Old habits, I guess. Robert unlocked the front door and gestured for Amy to go inside first. The house was warm and inviting, with hardwood floors and soft lighting. The living room had a large stone fireplace with family photos on the mantel. Amy could see pictures of Robert with a pretty woman who had kind eyes and a bright smile. That must have been Claire. The guest room is upstairs, Robert said, leading the way. It has its own bathroom and there are clean towels and sheets in the closet. As they walked up the stairs, Amy noticed more photos along the wall. Pictures of Robert and Claire at various ages, traveling to different places, celebrating birthdays and holidays. They looked happy together. Really, truly happy. The guest room was at the end of the hallway, and when Robert opened the door, Amy had to catch her breath. It was perfect. The room had a big window that looked out over the backyard, a comfortable-looking bed with a blue quilt, and a small desk by the window. Everything was clean and neat, like it had been waiting for someone to come and stay. The bathroom is right. Through here, Robert said, opening another door. And there are extra blankets in this closet if you get cold. Amy stood in the middle of the room, not quite believing what was happening. After weeks of sleeping in her car, the idea of having a real bed and a private bathroom seemed almost too good to be true. Robert, she said, I don't know how to thank you for this. You don't need to thank me, he replied. Why don't you get settled in and I'll make us some lunch? Are you hungry? Amy realized that she couldn't remember the last time she had eaten a real meal. For weeks she had been living on whatever she could buy from gas station convenience stores. The idea of a home-cooked meal made her stomach rumble loudly. I'm starving, she admitted with an embarrassed laugh. Good, Robert said. I'll be downstairs, in the kitchen. Come down whenever you're ready. After Robert left, Amy sat down on the edge of the bed and looked around the room again. It felt strange to be in someone else's house, especially someone she had just met, but it also felt safe in a way that she hadn't experienced in a very long time. She walked over to the window and looked out at the backyard. There was a large garden area that looked like it had been well maintained until recently. Now it was mostly empty, with just a few late-season flowers still blooming. Beyond the garden, she could see a small workshop building with its doors open. Inside, she could make out workbenches and tools hanging on the walls. Amy went back to her car and brought up a small bag with her most important belongings: the photograph of her children, a few changes of clothes, and a small wooden box that contained some of their baby items, things that had survived the fire because they had been stored in her car. When she came back upstairs, she could smell something delicious cooking in the kitchen. Her stomach rumbled again, reminding her of how long it had been since she had eaten real food. Amy looked at herself in the bathroom mirror and was shocked by what she saw. Her face was thinner than it used to be, and her eyes looked hollow and tired. Her hair needed washing and her clothes were wrinkled from sleeping in the car. She looked like exactly what she was, someone who had been living rough for too long. She washed her face and hands and tried to make herself look a little more presentable before going downstairs. The kitchen was warm and inviting, with copper pots hanging from hooks and herbs growing in small pots on the windowsill. Robert was standing at the stove, stirring something in a large pot. He had changed out of his work clothes into jeans and a comfortable-looking sweater. "I hope you like vegetable soup," he said when he saw her come in. "It's about the only thing I can make that doesn't come from a can." "It smells amazing," Amy said, and she meant it. The whole kitchen smelled like home-cooked comfort food. "Claire taught me how to make it," Robert said. "She said everyone should know how to make at least one thing from scratch. This was my one thing." Amy sat down at the kitchen table while Robert ladled soup into 2 bowls. He also put out a plate of fresh bread and butter, along with 2 glasses of water. "This is incredible," Amy said after taking her first spoonful. The soup was rich and flavorful, with chunks of vegetables and herbs that tasted like they had come from a real garden. "Thank you," Robert said. "It's nice to cook for someone else again. I usually just make myself a sandwich or heat up something frozen." As they ate, Amy found herself relaxing for the first time in months. The food was delicious, the house was warm, and Robert seemed genuinely kind without being pushy or expecting anything from her. "Can I ask you something?" Amy said after they had been eating in comfortable silence for a few minutes. "Of course. Why did you really stop when you saw me at the cemetery this morning? Most people would have just kept driving." Robert thought about that question while he buttered a piece of bread. "I guess because I know what it looks like when someone is drowning," he said finally. "After Claire died, I spent a lot of time in some pretty dark places. I probably would have stayed there if people hadn't pulled me out." "What kind of dark places?" Amy asked. Robert was quiet for a moment. "I stopped eating regularly, stopped taking care of the house, stopped answering the phone when friends called. I went to work because I had to, but as soon as I got home I would just sit in Claire's chair and stare at the wall until it was time to go to bed." Amy understood that feeling completely. "How long did that last?" "About a year," Robert admitted. "Maybe longer. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, finally came over one day and told me that Claire would be furious if she could see how I was treating myself. She said Claire had loved me too much for me to waste away like that." "Was she right?" Amy asked. Robert smiled a little. "Yeah, she was right. Claire would have kicked my butt if she could see me during that time. She always said life was too precious to waste, even when it hurt." Amy felt tears forming in her eyes again. "I don't know how to stop hurting," she said quietly. "Everything reminds me of them. Everything I see, everything I do, every place I go. It's like the whole world is just one big reminder of what I lost." Robert reached across the table and gently patted her hand. "I'm not going to tell you it gets easier," he said, "because that's not true. But it does get different. The hurt becomes something you can carry instead of something that's carrying you." "I used to be strong," Amy said. "I was a nurse in the pediatric ward. I took care of sick children every day. I thought I was tough enough to handle anything. But this—" She shook her head. "This broke me completely. Taking care of other people's children is different from losing your own," Robert said gently. "You can't compare those things." Amy finished her soup and sat back in her chair. She felt more full and satisfied than she had in weeks. "Robert, can I ask you another question?" "Sure. What do you do all day? I mean, besides work?" Robert looked a little embarrassed. "Not much, honestly. I work on small projects around the house. I read sometimes. I watch too much television." He paused. "I guess I've been pretty lonely." Amy could relate to that feeling too. Even surrounded by people at the hospital, She had often felt lonely, and since losing her children, the loneliness had become overwhelming. "I used to love my job," Amy said. "I felt like I was making a difference. But after the fire, I couldn't handle being around children anymore. Every child I saw reminded me of Lucy, Michael, and Grace. I would start crying in the middle of my shift." "That's completely understandable," Robert said. "Grief changes everything about how we see the world." Amy nodded. "I tried to go back to work about a month after the funeral. I thought it would help me feel normal again. But on my first day back, a little girl came in who was about Grace's age. She had the same dark hair and the same big brown eyes. I had to excuse myself and go cry in the supply closet for 20 minutes. "Did you try again after that?" "A few times," Amy said. "But it never got better. Every child looked like." 3 weeks had passed since Amy moved into Robert's guest room, and both of their lives had settled into a comfortable routine that neither of them had expected. Amy would wake up early and make coffee for both of them, something she had started doing on her 3rd day there as a way to say thank you. Robert would join her in the kitchen before heading off to his construction jobs, and they would sit together for a few minutes, talking about their plans for the day. Amy had begun helping Robert organize his business paperwork, and she was amazed by how disorganized everything had been. Bills were mixed in with client contracts, tax documents were scattered in different boxes, and his computer filing system was practically non-existent. "How did you ever find anything in here?" Amy asked one morning, sitting at the desk in Robert's small office. She had been working for 2 hours, sorting through a pile of invoices that went back 3 years. Robert looked up from where he was organizing his tools for the day. "Honestly, I didn't find things most of the time. I just hoped for the best and tried to remember where I put important stuff." Amy shook her head but smiled. "Well, those days are over. By the time I'm done with this office, you'll be able to find any document in under 30 seconds. "Claire always said I needed to get organized," Robert said. "She tried to help me a few times, but I was too stubborn to listen." Amy had noticed that Robert talked about Claire more often now. In the first few days after she moved in, he had barely mentioned his late wife. But as they had gotten more comfortable with each other, the stories had started coming out. Claire's love of gardening, her terrible cooking skills, the way she sang off-key in the shower every morning. Amy found that she enjoyed hearing about Claire. It reminded her that it was possible to talk about the people you loved without falling apart completely. She had started sharing stories about her children too, small memories that made her smile instead of cry. Lucy was obsessed with butterflies, Amy had told Robert one evening as they sat on the front porch after dinner. She had butterfly stickers on everything, her bedroom walls, her lunchbox, even her shoes. She said she was going to be a butterfly scientist when she grew up. "A butterfly scientist?" Robert had asked with a smile. "A lepidopterist," Amy had said. She actually learned the real word for it, 7 years old, and she could pronounce lepidopterist better than most adults. These conversations had become one of Amy's favorite parts of her day. For months, she had felt like talking about her children was forbidden, like mentioning them would make other people uncomfortable. But Robert listened to every story with genuine interest, asking questions and remembering details. The business organizing project had turned out to be exactly what Amy needed. It gave her something to focus on for several hours each day, and it made her feel useful again. Her nursing background had given her excellent organizational skills and attention to detail, which turned out to be perfect for managing Robert's chaotic paperwork. "I found 3 different insurance policies that you've been paying for," Amy told Robert one afternoon when he came home from a job site. "But 2 of them are covering the exact same things. You could save almost $300 a month by canceling the duplicates." Robert looked at the papers she had laid out on the desk. "How did you figure that out?" "I read all the fine print," Amy said with a proud smile. "It took me most of the afternoon, but I made a chart showing what each policy covers. Look." She showed him a detailed spreadsheet she had created on his computer, with color-coded sections for different types of coverage. Robert stared at it in amazement. "Amy, this is incredible. I've been paying for stuff I didn't even know I had." "That's not all," Amy said, clearly enjoying herself. "I also found receipts for business expenses that you never claimed on your taxes. There's at least $2,000 worth of deductions you missed last year alone. Robert felt a mix of gratitude and embarrassment. I had no idea I was being so wasteful with money. You weren't being wasteful, Amy said gently. You were grieving. People don't make the best financial decisions when they're dealing with loss. Amy understood this from personal experience. In the months after the fire, she had made several poor financial choices because she couldn't think clearly. She had taken cash advances on credit cards at terrible interest rates, missed important deadlines for insurance claims, and failed to apply for assistance programs that could have helped her. As the weeks went on, Amy's confidence began to return in small ways. She started taking longer walks around the neighborhood, exploring the tree-lined streets, and getting to know the area. She discovered a small library branch just a few blocks away and began checking out books again, something she hadn't done since before the fire. Robert noticed the changes in Amy's demeanor. She was still sad, and she still had days where grief overwhelmed her, but there was a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there when he first found her at the cemetery. She laughed more often, and she had started taking better care of herself. Her clothes were cleaner, her hair was styled, and she had gained back some of the weight she had lost while living in her car. You look healthier, Robert told her one morning over coffee. Amy touched her face self-consciously. I feel a little healthier. It's amazing what sleeping in a real bed and eating regular meals can do for a person. It's more than that, Robert said. You seem more like yourself, more like the person you probably were before all this happened. Amy considered that. I don't think I'll ever be exactly the same person I was before, she said. But maybe that's okay. Maybe I can become someone new, someone who carries their memory with me, but doesn't let the grief consume everything else. Robert understood exactly what she meant. After Claire died, he had tried to go back to being exactly the same person he had been when she was alive, but that was impossible. Grief had changed him in fundamental ways. It wasn't until he stopped fighting those changes that he had been able to start healing. One evening, as Amy was organizing receipts in the office, she came across a folder labeled Claire's Garden. Inside were dozens of photographs of a beautiful backyard garden, along with plant catalogs and handwritten notes about different flowers and vegetables. Robert, Amy called out, can you come look at something? Robert came into the office and saw the folder spread out on the desk. His face grew soft as he looked at the pictures. She loved that garden, he said quietly. She spent hours out there every day, especially in the spring and summer. She knew the name of every plant and exactly when to plant everything. Amy picked up one of the photographs. It showed Claire kneeling next to a bed of bright yellow flowers, smiling at the camera. She looked happy and peaceful, covered in dirt and holding a small trowel. The garden out back, Amy said. This is what it used to look like? Robert nodded. I haven't touched it since she died. I kept meaning to do something with it, but I didn't know where to start. And honestly, I was afraid that if I changed anything, I would lose another piece of her. Amy looked through more of the photographs. The garden had been absolutely beautiful, with carefully planned sections for vegetables, herbs, and flowers. There were stone pathways winding between the different areas and a small bench positioned to look out over the whole space. She had good taste, Amy said. This is like something you'd see in a magazine. She always said gardening was like meditation for her, Robert said. She could spend hours out there and lose track of time completely. Amy felt a familiar pang of sadness, but this time it was mixed with something else. Lucy would have loved this garden, she said. She was always picking flowers from whatever grew in our apartment complex. Dandelions mostly, but she treated them like they were roses. Robert sat down next to Amy and looked at the photographs with her. What kind of flowers did Lucy like best? Anything colorful, Amy said with a small smile. But especially anything that attracted butterflies. She could sit and watch butterflies for hours. An idea began forming in Robert's mind, but he didn't say anything about it yet. Instead, He helped Amy put the photographs back in the folder and they continued with their evening routine. But over the next few days, Robert found himself thinking more and more about the abandoned garden. He started paying attention to the empty space when he looked out the kitchen window, imagining what it could look like again. More importantly, he started thinking about how much Amy might enjoy having a project like that to work on. Amy had been staying with him for almost a month now, and Robert had to admit that he was dreading the day when she would feel ready to move on. The house felt alive again with another person in it. There were sounds of activity during the day, interesting conversations over meals, and a sense of purpose that had been missing since Claire died. But more than that, Robert genuinely cared about Amy's well-being. He wanted to see her continue healing, and he wanted to be part of that process if she would let him. One Saturday morning, Robert made a decision. After breakfast, he asked Amy if she wanted to take a walk around the backyard with him. "I want to show you something," he said, leading her toward the empty garden area. The space looked nothing like the beautiful garden in Claire's photographs. The raised beds were overgrown with weeds, the stone pathways were barely visible, and the small bench was covered. Winter had settled over the neighborhood, covering everything in a blanket of snow that made the world look clean and peaceful. Amy had been living with Robert for 3 months now, and their friendship had grown into something deeper and more meaningful than either of them had expected when they first met at the cemetery. The butterfly garden project had kept them busy through the fall months. They had spent countless evenings planning the layout, researching plants, and preparing the soil for spring planting. Robert had built beautiful raised beds using cedar wood, creating flowing curves that would guide visitors through the garden. Amy had chosen every plant with care, selecting flowers that would bloom at different times throughout the growing season to provide a constant source of nectar for butterflies. But more than just planning a garden, they had been building something together that felt like family. They had developed routines and traditions that made the house feel truly shared. Robert would make pancakes every Saturday morning while Amy read the newspaper aloud to him. Amy would cook dinner most evenings, trying new recipes she found online, and laughing when they didn't turn out quite right. They would spend evenings in the living room, Robert working on small woodworking projects while Amy read or organized more of his business paperwork. Amy's healing had been gradual but steady. She still visited the cemetery regularly, but now she went with fresh flowers from the grocery store instead of just sitting and crying. She had started talking about her children in the present tense sometimes, sharing memories that made her smile instead of just the ones that made her sad. Robert's healing had been just as important, though less obvious. For 3 years after Claire's death, he had been simply existing, going through the motions of daily life without really engaging with the world around him. Amy's presence had awakened something in him that he thought was gone forever, the desire to take care of someone else, to build something meaningful, to look forward to the future. Their relationship had remained carefully platonic, both of them understanding that they were still processing enormous losses. But there was an undeniable closeness between them, a comfort and trust that went beyond simple friendship. One evening in early December, Amy was organizing papers in Robert's office when she came across a folder she hadn't seen before. It was tucked behind some old tax documents, and when she opened it, she found architectural drawings for a house addition. The drawings were detailed and professional, showing plans for a large sunroom that would extend from the back of the house into the garden area. There were notes in Robert's handwriting about windows, flooring materials, and heating options. At the bottom of one page, he had written, "For Amy's garden room," in careful block letters. Amy stared at the drawings for a long time, trying to understand what she was looking at. Robert had been planning to build her a permanent space in his house. Not just a guest room, but something designed specifically for her. Something that would connect the indoor and outdoor spaces she loved most. Her hands were shaking as she carried the folder downstairs to the living room, where Robert was carving small wooden ornaments for their Christmas tree. "Robert," she said quietly, "what is this?" Robert looked up from his carving and saw the folder in her hands. His face turned red with embarrassment. "I was going to talk to you about that," he said, I just wasn't sure when the right time would be. Amy sat down next to him on the couch and spread the drawings out on the coffee table. You were planning to build me a sunroom? I was thinking about it, Robert admitted. You spend so much time looking out at the garden area, and you've mentioned how much you loved the sunroom at your friend's house before everything happened. I thought maybe you would enjoy having a space like that here. Amy looked at the drawings more carefully. The planned sunroom was beautiful, with floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides and French doors that would open directly onto the garden. Robert had even included built-in bookshelves and a window seat with storage underneath. This must have cost you a fortune to have designed, Amy said. Robert looked embarrassed again. I actually drew them myself. It's part of what I do for work, designing additions and renovations. I've been working on them for a few weeks, just sketching ideas when I couldn't sleep. Amy felt tears forming in her eyes as she realized what this meant. Robert hadn't just been planning a home improvement project. He had been planning a future that included her permanently. Robert, this is beautiful, but I can't let you spend this kind of money on me. It's not just for you, Robert said quietly. It's for both of us. I've been thinking about what this house could become, what our life here could look like. This sunroom would be a space where we could both enjoy the garden, where you could have your morning coffee and I could work on projects when the weather's bad. Amy looked at him with surprise. Our life. Robert set down his carving and turned to face her completely. Amy, I need to tell you something that I've been thinking about for weeks now. Amy's heart started beating faster. She had been having her own confusing feelings lately, but she hadn't been sure if Robert felt anything beyond friendship for her. When Claire died, Robert continued, I thought that part of my life was over forever. I thought I would just live, alone in this house until I got too old to take care of myself, and then I would move to some retirement community somewhere and wait to die. Amy reached over and took his hand. Robert, let me finish, he said gently. I need to say this. When I saw you at the cemetery that morning, something in me recognized something in you. We were both drowning in our grief, both convinced that the best parts of our lives were behind us. But these past few months have shown me that I was wrong. Robert paused, trying to find the right words for what he wanted to say. I don't know exactly what this is between us, he continued. I know it's not the same as what I had with Claire, and I know it's not the same as what you had with your children's father. But it's something real and meaningful and worth protecting. Amy felt her heart swelling with emotions she hadn't expected to feel again. I feel the same way, she said softly. I just wasn't sure if you... Amy, Robert said, I want to build you more than just a sunroom. I want to build you a life where you feel safe and loved and valued, where you can heal at your own pace, without worrying about where you're going to live or how you're going to pay for things, where you can honor your children's memory while also creating new memories. Amy was crying now, but they were tears of joy and relief rather than sadness. Are you asking me to stay here permanently? Not just as a house guest, but as... What? Robert smiled through his own tears. I guess I'm asking if you want to build a family with me. Not a traditional family, maybe, but something that works for us. 2 people who understand loss and healing, who can take care of each other and create something beautiful together. Amy looked down at the architectural drawings spread out on the coffee table. She could imagine herself in that sunroom, surrounded by windows and plants, watching butterflies visit the garden they would create together. She could imagine years of mornings spent in that space, sharing coffee and conversation with this kind, gentle man who had saved her life in more ways than one. Yes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, I want that more than anything. Robert pulled her into a gentle hug, and they sat together on the couch, holding each other and crying happy tears. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the dormant garden where they would soon plant flowers for butterflies and build a life together. There's something else, Robert said, after they had sat quietly for a few minutes. What? Amy asked. Robert got up and walked over to his workshop area in the garage. When he came back, he was carrying a small wooden box that Amy had never seen before. "I've been working on this in the evenings," he said, handing her the box. "I wanted to wait until Christmas to give it to you, but this seems like the right moment." Amy opened the box carefully and gasped when she saw what was inside. Robert had carved 3 small wooden butterflies, each one painted in bright, beautiful colors. Under each butterfly was a small nameplate: Lucy, Michael, Grace, I. "Oh, they can't replace what you lost," Robert said quietly. "But I wanted you to have something beautiful to remember them by. Something that would remind you that their spirits are still with you, still bringing beauty into the world." Amy picked up one of the butterflies, the one labeled Lucy, and held it carefully in her palm. The craftsmanship was exquisite, with tiny details carved into the wings and delicate colors that seemed to shimmer in the light. "Robert, this is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever made for me," she said through her tears. "How did you know exactly what I needed?" "Because I know what it's like to want to carry someone with you," Robert said. "After Claire died, I kept looking for ways to feel close to her. I wanted something tangible that would remind me that our love was real, and that it didn't end just because she was gone." Amy carefully placed the butterfly back in the box and looked at the other 2. Michael's butterfly was painted in shades of blue and green, like the ocean he had loved to visit. Grace's butterfly was soft pink and yellow, like the sunrise. "They're perfect," Amy said. "They're absolutely perfect." 2 years had passed since that snowy December evening when Robert had shown Amy the plans for the sunroom, and their life together had blossomed into something more beautiful than either of them had dared to imagine. The sunroom had been completed that spring, just in time for Amy to watch the first butterflies visit their newly planted garden through its floor-to-ceiling windows. Today was their wedding day, a small, intimate ceremony in their backyard garden that had become the most beautiful space in the neighborhood. Amy stood at the bedroom window, looking out at the chairs arranged on the lawn and the simple white arch that Robert had built and decorated with flowers from their own garden. In just an hour, their closest friends and neighbors would gather to witness them promise to spend the rest of their lives together. Amy wore a simple blue dress that reminded her of the sweater she had been wearing the day Robert found her at the cemetery. It felt right to honor that moment when their lives had first connected. Robert had chosen to wear a gray suit with a small wooden butterfly pin on his lapel, one that matched the 3 he had carved for her children. The past 2 years had brought more healing and growth than Amy had thought possible. The butterfly garden had become exactly what they had hoped, a living memorial that brought joy instead of only sadness. Every morning, Amy would sit in the sunroom with her coffee and watch the butterflies visit the bright flowers they had planted. Monarchs, swallowtails, painted ladies, dozens of species had discovered their garden and made it a regular stop. Amy had eventually returned to work, but in a different capacity than before. She had started volunteering at a grief counseling center, helping other parents who had lost children. Her own experience with devastating loss, combined with her nursing background and the healing she had found with Robert, made her uniquely qualified to help others navigate their darkest moments. "I can't fix their pain," Amy had told Robert after her first day volunteering. "But I can show them that it's possible to survive it, that there can be life and even happiness on the other side of grief." Robert's construction business had flourished with Amy's organizational skills and attention to detail. She had convinced him to start a website, modernize his bidding process, and expand into larger renovation projects. More importantly, they had started specializing in creating healing spaces, sunrooms, garden rooms, and meditation spaces for people who were recovering from illness or loss. "There's something special about spaces that connect the indoors and outdoors," Robert had explained to a potential client just last week. "They remind us that healing is a natural process, like seasons changing or flowers blooming." Their house had become known in the community as a place where healing happened. Friends and neighbors would stop by to sit in the garden when they were going through difficult times. Amy had started a small support group that met in the sunroom once a week, bringing together people who were dealing with various kinds of loss. But it wasn't just their work that had brought them fulfillment. They had created daily rituals and traditions that filled their home with warmth and love. Saturday morning pancakes had evolved into elaborate brunches where they would try new recipes and plan their week together. Evening walks through the neighborhood had become opportunities to dream about future projects and share stories from their days. They had also created new ways to honor the people they had lost. Every year on the anniversary of Claire's death, they would visit her grave and plant new flowers in the garden. On the anniversary of the fire that took Amy's children, they would hold a small memorial service in the sunroom, lighting candles and sharing favorite memories. Amy still visited Lucy, Michael, and Grace's graves regularly, but now she went with fresh flowers and stories about the butterfly garden. She would tell them about the new varieties of butterflies they had spotted, about the vegetables they were growing, about the people who came to find peace in their healing space. "You would love our garden," she would say, sitting on the small bench Robert had installed near their graves. "Yesterday I counted 15 different butterflies all at the same time, and the monarchs are getting ready to migrate south for the winter." Robert would often join her for these visits, bringing small wooden toys he had carved, different animals each time, painted in bright colors that would weather the elements. The cemetery groundskeeper had told them that other visitors had started leaving wooden toys at their own family graves, inspired by the beautiful gifts they left for Amy's children. As Amy finished getting ready for their wedding, she picked up the wooden box that still sat on her nightstand. The 3 carved butterflies that Robert had made for her children had become her most treasured possessions, symbols of how love could be transformed but never destroyed. She carried the box downstairs to the sunroom, where she would wait for the ceremony to begin. The afternoon light was streaming through the windows, illuminating the garden where dozens of real butterflies were visiting the late summer flowers. As she sat in her favorite chair, Amy thought about how much her life had changed since that terrible morning when Robert had found her weeping over 3 fresh graves. She had been broken then, convinced that her life was over, and that she would never feel anything but pain again. She couldn't have imagined that grief could coexist with joy, that love could grow in the space left by loss, that it was possible to honor the past while embracing the future. Robert appeared in the doorway of the sunroom, looking handsome in his gray suit and slightly nervous about the ceremony ahead. "Ready?" he asked with a smile. "More than ready," Amy replied, standing up and taking his arm. They walked outside together to where their small group of guests was waiting. Mrs. Patterson from next door, who had been instrumental in Robert's healing after Claire's death. Dr. Williams from the Grief Counseling Center where Amy volunteered. A few of Robert's longtime clients who had become friends. The pastor from the community church who had agreed to perform the ceremony, even though neither Amy nor Robert were regular members. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They had written their own vows, promising to support each other through both joy and sorrow, to create space for healing and growth, to honor their past while building their future together. "I promise to love you not in spite of our losses, but because of how those losses have shaped us into people capable of deep compassion and gratitude," Amy said, her voice steady and clear. "I promise to build with you not just a home, but a sanctuary where love can flourish in all its forms. Love for each other, love for those we've lost, and love for all the people who will find healing in the spaces we create together." Robert replied. When they exchanged rings, simple bands that Robert had crafted himself from wood and silver, there wasn't a dry eye among their guests. These were people who had witnessed their individual journeys through grief and their gradual healing together. After the ceremony, they held a small reception in the garden. Mrs. Patterson had made her famous apple pie, Dr. Williams had brought homemade bread, and several neighbors had contributed dishes that turned their backyard into a feast of community support and celebration. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, the butterflies began their evening dance among the flowers. Amy and Robert stood together at the edge of their garden, watching the graceful creatures that had become symbols of transformation and hope in their lives. "Do you ever wonder what Claire would think of all this?" Amy asked quietly. Robert considered the question. "I think she would be happy that I found love again. She always said that love multiplies rather than divides, that loving one person doesn't take away from loving another." Amy nodded. "I think Lucy, Michael, and Grace would be happy too. They loved it when I was happy. Lucy used to say that my smile was her favorite thing in the whole world. As if in response to their words, a monarch butterfly landed on Amy's bouquet, resting there for several seconds before floating away toward the setting sun. I think they all approve, Robert said with a smile. That evening, after their guests had gone home and they had cleaned up from the reception, Amy and Robert sat together in the sunroom, watching the last light fade from their garden. They were officially married now, officially committed to building a life together, but it felt like a natural continuation of something that had been growing between them for 2 years. "What do you think our life will look like in 5 years?" Amy asked, curled up next to Robert on the comfortable couch they had chosen together. "I think we'll have expanded the garden," Robert said thoughtfully. "Maybe added a greenhouse where we can grow plants year-round. I think the grief counseling center will have grown, and you'll probably be running your own programs there. And I think you'll have started teaching woodworking classes," Amy added. "You're so good at it, and I've seen how much joy it brings you to create beautiful things." They dreamed together about the future they would build, more healing spaces for their clients, possible expansion of their home to include a proper workshop and meeting space for Amy's support groups, maybe even writing a book about their experience for other people dealing with loss. But more than specific plans, they dreamed about the feeling of their